In this documentary, we delve deeper into a hidden history of Cambodia, a tiny kingdom stuck in between Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. Cambodia is often characterized by its centuries-long devotion to Theravada Buddhism, a spiritual tradition that has shaped its social institutions, political structures, and cultural identity. Yet, within this deeply Buddhist context lies a little-known and remarkable historical episode. In the 17th century, the Cambodian throne was occupied, albeit briefly, by a Muslim ruler known as Sultan Ibrahim. This enigmatic figure first came to my attention through a Dutch colonial travel diary published in 1917 by the Dutch diplomat Hendrik Muller. Hidden in the archives of the National Library in Phnom Penh, the book revealed a largely forgotten chapter in Southeast Asian history. It described a tense encounter between Dutch East India Company merchants and a powerful Muslim king at the Cambodian court. What began as a promising commercial mission soon culminated in a military defeat the Dutch had neither anticipated nor prepared for. The clash between the Muslim king and the Dutch East India Company deserves more scholarly attention. Why did a Cambodian royal renounce the dominant Buddhist tradition in favor of Islam? And how did he defeat the most powerful company of the 17th century, the Dutch East India Company? Our search for the identity of Cambodia's elusive Sultan king begins in Phnom Penh, the country's dynamic capital, located at the confluence of the Mekong, Tonle Sap, and Bassac rivers. We start with the diaries of the Dutch merchant Jan Dirk van Galen, the first Dutchman who ever set foot on Cambodian land. In his records, Van Galen referred to the city by its classical Khmer name, Chaktomuk. The term, often translated as Four Faces or Happy Junction, reflected not only its geographical significance, but also its religious and commercial importance during the early modern period. To follow Van Galen's journey, we chartered a traditional wooden boat, at a price far exceeding expectations. The voyage took us upstream along the Tonle Sap River toward Oudong, Cambodia's 17th century royal capital. Following successive invasions from neighboring Siam, the former and more well-known capital Angkor fell into decline, prompting the Khmer royal court to relocate south, first to Lovek and later to Oudong. Many Cambodian historians argued the relocation of Angkor served a strategic defensive reason against the Thai. But the Dutch chronicles illustrate that economic ambitions played a role as well. Midway through the journey, our boatman turned to us with a curious question. Why had we paid so much to visit Oudong? I explained, somewhat enthusiastically, that we were filming a documentary retracing the steps of Van Galen, the first known Dutch merchant to reach the royal capital. The boatman looked puzzled. He was familiar with the Portuguese and the French colonial presences, but the Dutch? Their role had seemingly faded from local consciousness. Van Galen himself had set sail on June 10, 1637, aboard a vessel named Oudong. He was accompanied by 11 Dutch sailors, a Laotian merchant, and a slave from Goa. Among his possessions was a letter from Governor-General Antonio van Diemen, outlining a proposal to establish a trade monopoly centered on deer hides, a commodity in high demand on the Japanese market. The shogun only allowed the Dutch to stay, because unlike the Portuguese, they didn't try to spread religion and focused only on trade. The Dutch were confined to a small artificial island called Dejima in Nagasaki Bay. An hour into the voyage, we arrived at Kampong Long, a once flourishing 17th century port that had functioned as a key maritime hub. It was there that Van Galen encountered Kaffioi, the Japanese harbor master. Kaffioi personally escorted him inland to a Dutch trading outpost located near Tonle Sap. To locate this site, we consulted a drawing preserved in Hendrik Muller's publication. In the background of the sketch, Mount Oudong could be seen rising above a scattering of settlements. As we walked along the riverbank, no trace of the Dutch former presence remained. Local fishermen explained that the river's shifting course had likely submerged any remnants long ago. And yet the social fabric Van Galen once described had endured. In Tonle Sap, we met Cham Muslims, silversmiths, weavers, traders, and fishers. They were the descendants of the very community recorded in the Dutch merchants' journals. The Cham people trace their origins to Champa, a once powerful kingdom located in what is now central and southern Vietnam. Following the fall of Champa in the 15th century, large numbers sought refuge in Cambodia, settling along its river systems. But the Cham were not the only Muslim community Van Galen observed. There also lived Muslims from the Malay Peninsula, Java, and even China, bound by a shared Islamic faith. Van Galen, however, perceived this religious cohesion with suspicion. In his writings, he expressed discomfort with the unity he observed among the Muslim communities. His anxiety deepened upon discovering a sizable Portuguese population in the area as well. They were not only commercial competitors, they were their sworn enemies. The following morning, heavy rains delayed our meeting with Dara, a local guide who had promised to take us to the site of the old royal palace, the very place where Van Galen held diplomatic audiences with the Cambodian king. Once the monsoon cleared, we set out by car. Soon we found ourselves driving along a narrow, tree-lined road. Gradually the palace came into view. Silent, dignified, and seemingly saturated with forgotten histories. But within the palace walls, Van Galen made a surprising discovery. The Cambodian kingdom was not governed by a single sovereign, but by two co-rulers. Oudong Raja, the elder of the two, oversaw the kingdom's internal political affairs. He was the older brother of Prince Ponheachan, the future Muslim king. The second monarch, Ute, Ponheachan's uncle, held responsibility for external relations and trade, managing interactions with foreign merchants. Van Galen's journals offer valuable insight into the royal family's genealogy. Ponheachan was the son of King Che Cheta II, who reigned from 1618 to 1628, a ruler remembered for strategic foresight during a period of regional instability. In an effort to shield the kingdom from repeated Siamese incursions, Che Cheta relocated the royal capital from Lovek to Oudong, a move that symbolized both retreat and resilience. Ponheachan was raised in the shadow of these decisions, a prince shaped by stories of precarious alliances and existential threats. It was into this complex political terrain that Van Galen entered. His mission was explicit: to establish trade relations, uphold neutrality, and navigate the sensitivities of a bifurcated court without offense. Yet Van Galen proved an imperfect envoy. In his journals, he expressed frustration with what he perceived as excessive formality at court, particularly the expectation that he bow before the monarchs. He also resented the costly ritual of presenting weekly gifts, a practice embedded in Southeast Asian diplomatic culture and essential to maintaining favor at court. Then came a pivotal moment. King Oudong Raja formally requested military assistance, citing renewed threats from Siam. Specifically, he asked that 4 cannons be delivered from the Udderwater, Van Galen's ship. Other groups, including Cham, Chinese, Malay, and even Portuguese communities, had already pledged their support to the Cambodian side. To the surprise of the king, Van Galen declined the request. He explained that he had received no instructions from Batavia authorizing military intervention. His role, he insisted, was commercial, not political. From a Dutch perspective, his answer was not a surprise. The Dutch East India Company was reluctant to supply weapons to local rulers, fearing that doing so might strengthen them militarily and reduce Dutch leverage in the region. But in the eyes of King Oudong Raja, his refusal was a diplomatic misstep. It constituted a direct affront to his prestige. In a court where honor and divine kingship were inseparable, Van Galen's response was interpreted as a serious insult. Oudong Raja's confidence in the Dutch began to waver. Why, he wondered, would a supposed ally withhold support at a moment of crisis? Was it possible that the Dutch were secretly allied with Siam? We lingered at the palace for a while. Its quiet grandeur was also a silent witness to a dramatic coup that would take place here 1 year later. The Dutch mission was now under the leadership of Pieter van Regemorts and Hendrik Broekman, who had succeeded Van Galen after his recall to Batavia. Under their new leadership, a period of cautious stability emerged. Relations with King Angdan Raja remained cooperative, and the deer hide trade flourished, proving highly profitable for the Dutch East India Company. For a time it seemed that commerce might triumph where diplomacy had stumbled. But in 1642, stability dissolved with unexpected swiftness. King Angdan Raja died suddenly, officially of fever, though court whispers hinted at darker causes. Rumors circulated that he had been poisoned by a rival faction, possibly under the direction of a nephew of King Ute. The death sent shockwaves through the kingdom. The dual kingship system, always a delicate arrangement, could not withstand the ensuing wave of suspicion and political maneuvering. In this dual kingship system, each monarch had cultivated his own networks of nobles, generals, and foreign allies. With Angdan Raja's death, that balance collapsed. Many expected Prince Ponhea Chan, brother of the deceased king, to assume the throne. Yet King Uti acted swiftly, bypassing his nephew and installing his own son Padumaraja as the new ruler. To Ponhea Chan and his supporters, this was nothing less than a calculated humiliation. Determined to reclaim what he believed was his rightful inheritance, Ponhea Chan began to mobilize. Echoing the epic Ramayana tale, he launched a carefully orchestrated coup. Backed by foreign fighters from Champa, Malaysia, and Portugal, he staged a violent seizure of power. In the royal palace, King Ute and his son were killed, and Ponhea Chan ascended the throne, adopting the royal title Ramadipati. What followed in the weeks after his coronation surprised the kingdom deeply. In a bold act of political consolidation, Ramadipati married a Cham princess, strengthening his ties to the Muslim communities that had long lived along Cambodia's waterways. But then, he made a move that upset the kingdom even more. He broke with centuries of royal tradition. He renounced Buddhism and publicly embraced Islam as the new faith of Cambodia. Cambodia no longer had a Dhamaraja, but a Sultan. The following morning, our journey took a contemplative turn, one centered on a question that has echoed through the centuries. Why did Prince Ponhea Chan abandon Buddhism and embrace Islam? In the diaries of Pieter van Regemorts, we can read the marriage was more than faith and love alone. By embracing Islam and marrying a Cham princess, Sultan Ibrahim secured political alliances, and positioned himself within a broader geopolitical framework that extended across maritime Southeast Asia. Behind the conversion stood also two influential Malaysian merchants, Inche Assam and Inche Lanak. In return for adopting Islam, they offered the king considerable rewards, privileged access to trans-regional trade routes, and, perhaps most importantly, protection from Cambodia's perennial threats, Siam to the west and Vietnam to the east. For a monarch hemmed in by rival powers, the alliance may have felt like a lifeline. To see the monarch abandon the Buddhist faith, a tradition that had defined the Khmer royal identity for centuries, was to witness a rupture in the symbolic heart of the kingdom. To understand the consequences of his controversial decision, we travel to Oudong Mountain the next morning. Oudong Mountain is the royal necropolis founded in the early 17th century by King Srey Soryapur. Here lie the great rulers of the Checheta dynasty, King Ang Dan Raja, Paduma Raja, and King Ute. But one king is missing. His absence speaks louder than stone, a quiet testimony to how deeply his conversion unsettled the kingdom, and how history chose to set him apart. We continue our walk and reach another hill, far from the main necropolis, and reach the weathered stupa of King Ang Chan, who ruled Cambodia from 1516 to 1566 and successfully defended the kingdom against Siamese invasions. Before it lies a massive reclining Buddha, its serene face gazing calmly over the valley below. And then just 60 meters away we stumble upon something unexpected, a mosque. Outside its entrance we meet an elderly man in traditional Cham dress. He tells us that the mosque was a gift from King Oudong, a 19th century ruler, who sought to recognize and honor the Cham Muslim minority. He gave them a piece of land on this mountain where the Chambani community still live. Every Friday they pray in this mosque, and also remember the reign of Sultan Ibrahim on this mountain. That afternoon, we descended the hill, making our way toward the local market nearby, the site of the next chapter in our unfolding story. This time, our guide was the Journal of Gerrit van Weisthof, a Dutch merchant best known for his earlier journey to the Lao Kingdom. Lesser known is his account of what became one of the bloodiest moments in the Dutch presence in Cambodia, the massacre of the VOC envoy at this very market. What had once been a potential Dutch ally was now perceived as a rising rival. Alarmed by this shift, Peter van Regemortis began sending urgent reports to Governor-General Van Diemen in Batavia. In them he warned of two powerful Muslim merchants, Inche Assam and Inche Lanak, who hated the Dutch. Their hatred was probably driven by revenge, most likely a response to earlier Dutch military conquests of fellow Muslims in Banda, Aceh, and Malacca. According to Van Regemortis, they presented Sultan Ibrahim with an ultimatum. If he wished to enjoy the protection and economic benefits of the wider Muslim trading world, he would have to expel the Dutch. On the morning of November 21st, 1643, Van Regemorts led a diplomatic delegation into the royal city in the hopes of renewing ties with the king. At the city gates stood a royal elephant draped in golden cloth. The Dutch read it as a gesture of honor. But for Sultan Ibrahim, it was the opening move of a carefully orchestrated ambush. As the delegation entered the bustling market, the atmosphere turned tense. From within the crowd, figures emerged. Soldiers sprang from shadowed corners. In a matter of seconds, the hum of trade was replaced by cries of terror. The Dutch had no time to draw their swords. Van Regemorts and 25 of his men were cut down where they stood. The ground, moments earlier scattered with produce and spices, was now soaked in blood. For the Dutch, it was a devastating blow. They had arrived seeking commerce, not conflict. But for Sultan Ibrahim, it was a definitive act of sovereignty. With this act of violence, he sent a clear message to Batavia and beyond. The Dutch East India Company was no longer welcome in Cambodia. The next day, the final day of our journey, we set out to uncover how the battle between Sultan Ibrahim and the Dutch truly ended. With the letters of Simon Domkins in hand, we returned to Phnom Penh, where the final confrontation had taken place. A dramatic battle of revenge that would bring Dutch ambitions in Cambodia to a crashing halt. It did not take long to locate the battlefield. In Hendrik Muller's early 20th century publication, we studied a sketch attributed to a Dutch eyewitness. In the distance, the familiar silhouette of Wat Phnom rose from its hill, the city's spiritual heart. From there, it was only a short walk to the riverside, where the Dutch-Cambodian War reached its violent climax. When news of the massacre reached Batavia, Governor-General Antonio van Diemen responded with fury. The ambush ordered by Sultan Ibrahim was seen not merely as treachery, but as an act of war. The Dutch East India Company, he declared, could not let the insult go unanswered. In 1644, 5 heavily armed ships were dispatched to Cambodia under the command of Captain Haruz. Yet Sultan Ibrahim was already preparing his defense. Through a network of spies embedded in Java, he had learned of the Dutch fleet's arrival well in advance. When the ship sailed up the Mekong River, the Sultan offered no resistance at Phnom Penh. His silence was calculated. Rather than confront the Dutch in open waters, he devised a more complex and deadly strategy. Allow them to advance, lure them deeper inland, and close the trap. Near Oudong, the Dutch encountered the first surprise. A massive pontoon bridge stretched across the river, halting their progress. When they attempted to turn back toward Phnom Penh, they were met with an even graver revelation. A second pontoon bridge had been constructed behind them. From the riverbanks, cannon fire and musket volleys erupted. Cham, Malay, and Portuguese troops under Ibrahim's command launched a coordinated assault from both shores. The Mekong, once a trade artery, had become a corridor of smoke, fire, and death. Captain Haruz was killed in the opening hours of the battle. Command passed to Simon Domkins, who now faced an almost impossible decision: surrender or attempt a breakout. For 3 harrowing days, the Dutch ships remained trapped under constant bombardment. Supplies dwindled, men fell. Then on the 3rd day, fortune shifted. A sudden tailwind offered a narrow chance for escape. With full force, the remaining VOC ships rammed through the southern pontoon bridge at Phnom Penh and fled toward the open sea. The survivors limped back to Batavia, defeated and diminished. 62 were dead, 250 wounded, and 29 taken prisoner. The campaign was a catastrophic failure. Sultan Ibrahim had achieved what few Southeast Asian rulers of the time could: the complete and forceful expulsion of a European colonial power. Ibrahim's victory did not merely end the Dutch presence in Cambodia. It reshaped the region's political balance and left an enduring legacy of resistance.